arrived at my cousin's place as if I were just coming to stay for a short while. Nothing more. My uncle had invited me to remain while I sorted out some personal matters at home. And since my cousin and I had always been close, it seemed like the obvious choice. The house was warm and welcoming, filled with the usual sounds of family life. But what I hadn't expected was how much attention I would pay to her. She was my cousin's mother, technically my aunt by marriage, but that word never quite suited her. She was young for a mother, barely in her 40s, with a natural elegance that set her apart. There was something in the way she carried herself, in her too easy laugh, in the way her gaze stayed just a second longer than necessary. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. She was just being friendly, that's all. But the longer I stayed, the harder it became to ignore. Little moments struck me. A playful jab at my cooking skills, standing a bit too close, a knowing smile loaded with something I wasn't ready to name. I chalked it up to her welcoming nature. It was simply her personality. Right. The first time I truly noticed something had shifted was late at night. I'd come down for a glass of water and she was sitting on the couch with a glass of wine. Her husband hadn't come home yet as usual. She beckoned me over and I hesitated before joining her. The room was dimly lit, the only glow coming from the television, playing a show neither of us was really watching. We talked about trivial things at first. Then she sighed into her glass. "Do you ever think you're just pretending?" she asked. I didn't know how to respond right away. There was weight behind those words, something personal. Sometimes I admitted. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. It's hard. You get locked into routine, and before you know it, you're just existing. I nodded, a strange sense of understanding washing over me, even though I didn't know why. The conversation drifted, but that moment stayed etched in my memory. Days passed, and the dynamic between us subtly changed. She started sitting next to me more often, staying a little longer. Laughter came more easily when we talked. My cousin didn't seem to notice, and her husband was barely around, so no one was there to see how she looked at me when no one else was watching. One afternoon, we were in the kitchen. She leaned over me to reach something on the top shelf. Her frame pressed against mine for a second. I froze. It was innocent enough, or at least it should have been. But when she pulled back, she looked up at me with an unreadable expression. "Sorry," she said softly, but she didn't move away immediately. I swallowed, forcing a small laugh. "No problem." She looked like she wanted to say more, but my cousin walked in and the moment shattered. I told myself I was overthinking it, that it was all in my head. But the more time I spent in that house, the more convinced I became. Then one evening, I walked into the living room and found her alone. The TV was on, but she wasn't watching it. She looked up as I entered, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. I shook my head. "You," she sighed. "It happens a lot these days." I sat at a distance, but she moved closer, her knee almost brushing mine. "You know," she murmured, "it's nice having you here. The house feels different." "Different how?" I asked, my voice lower than I'd intended. She looked at me. Really looked. And for the first time, I couldn't convince myself it was all in my head. "Lighter," she said finally, "like I can breathe again." I didn't know how to respond. The air between us was thick with something unspoken, something dangerous. I wanted to pull away, to break whatever was happening, but I couldn't. She held my gaze for a second longer before looking away and standing abruptly. "I should go to bed," she said, her voice trembling slightly. I nodded, watching her walk away, my heart pounding. That night, I lay awake, replaying every glance, every moment. I told myself I needed to be careful, that this was a line I couldn't cross. But I already knew the line was starting to blur. The first time it happened, it wasn't planned. I hadn't thought about it, not in the way it actually unfolded. But once it did, there was no going back. It was a quiet evening. My cousin was out with friends and her husband was working late. She'd been tense all day. Clearly, something was weighing on her, but I hadn't asked. I'd started to recognize the signs. Her short replies, the way she sighed when she thought no one was listening. We ended up outside on the terrace. The night air was cool but not unpleasant. She had a glass of wine. I sat beside her, staring into the darkness. Have you ever felt invisible? She asked suddenly. I turned to look at her. Like you're surrounded by people, but no one really sees you. Like you're just there existing, but not really mattering to anyone. I didn't know what to say. She laughed softly, shaking her head. Ignore me. I don't even know why I'm saying this, but I had seen it. That was the problem. I'd seen how she hid her unhappiness behind a smile, how she filled the voids in her life with small gestures. I'd seen how she looked at me when she thought I wasn't paying attention. I don't know who moved first. Maybe her, maybe me. But suddenly she was close, closer than she'd ever been, her skin inches from mine. This is a bad idea, I whispered. She didn't move away. I know. Her mouth brushed against mine, hesitant at first, testing, waiting for me to stop her. But I didn't. The moment was slow, almost careful, as if we were both waiting for the guilt to hit, for the reality of what we were doing to crash down. But it didn't. She drew closer, and for a second nothing else existed. No consequences, no betrayal, just that. When she finally pulled back, she didn't speak. She just looked at me, her expression unreadable, before standing and walking away. I sat there a long time, staring at the empty space where she'd been, knowing everything had changed. The following days were filled with tension. We didn't talk about what happened, but we didn't avoid each other either. There was now an unspoken understanding between us, a silent awareness of the shift. The next time wasn't an accident. She found me in the kitchen late at night when the house was quiet and everyone else was asleep. This time, she didn't hesitate. We shouldn't do this, I murmured as my hands settled at her waist. She looked at me, eyes dark and filled with something I didn't want to name, then told me to stop talking. I didn't. What followed was reckless, desperate, fueled by something neither of us could control anymore. It wasn't just attraction. It was everything she'd been missing. Everything I hadn't realized I wanted. There was a hunger in the way she moved, a frustration, as if she'd held back for too long. It wasn't love. I wasn't naive enough to believe that. But it was something. Something dangerous. Afterward, lying there in the silence, the weight of what we'd done settled in. We can't do this again, I said, but my voice lacked conviction. She turned her head to look at me, a small, sad smile on her lips. Do you really believe that? I didn't answer. The secrecy made it worse. The stolen glances, the way we had to pretend nothing had changed in front of my cousin. It was a dangerous game, but neither of us wanted to stop. It didn't take long for things to spiral. Paranoia set in first. Every time someone looked at us too long, every time my cousin asked why her mother was in such a good mood lately, every unexpected creak of a door, we were both on edge. The thrill only made it harder to stop. The risk, the chance of getting caught, it all added to the tension. But deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before it all came crashing down. It started with small things, little changes in her behavior that no one else seemed to notice. She was more distracted, sometimes forgetting what she was saying mid-sentence. She'd glance at me across the room and look away too quickly, her hands fidgeting more than usual. I could sense the weight of the situation pressing down on both of us. Then came the close calls. The time my cousin walked into the kitchen just as she moved away from me, the tension still thick in the air. The night her husband came home early, forcing me to slip out of her room with my heart racing. The moment her son asked why his mom was texting so much lately. I told myself we needed to stop, but I didn't. Neither did she. The turning point came when her husband finally noticed. He wasn't stupid, just distracted, working long hours, always tired when he got home. Maybe that's why it took him so long. But when he saw it, there was no undoing it. It was a Saturday evening. My cousin was out with friends, and I was in the living room trying to act normal. She was in the kitchen pouring herself a drink. Her husband walked in, watched her for a moment before speaking. "You're different lately," he said. She didn't turn around. "What do you mean?" "You know exactly what I mean." Silence stretched. I could sense the tension in the air. "You're hiding something," he said, his voice lower. I can see it. I forced myself to stay still, not to react. She laughed, but it sounded forced. You're imagining things. Really? He spoke softly. Who is it? The glass in her hand tightened slightly before she set it down. You're being ridiculous. He stayed silent for a long moment. Then he exhaled sharply and walked away. That should have been a warning. A sign to stop, to back off before it was too late. But the problem with these things is that once you've gone too far, stopping becomes impossible. The real explosion came a week later. I was in my room when I heard them arguing downstairs. At first, I ignored it. Married couples fight all the time. But then I heard my name. The way he said it, the anger, the certainty. You think I don't see it? The way you look at him? The way he looks at you? You're paranoid, she shot back. He's just a guest. Family. He laughed without humor. Don't insult me. My heart pounded. This was it. My phone was in my hand. I needed to leave. I couldn't be there when it all blew up. But before I could do anything, heavy, furious footsteps sounded, then a knock at my door. I opened it, already bracing myself. Her husband stood there, his gaze cold and unreadable. We need to talk. I could have lied. I could have denied everything, but the way he looked at me, I knew he already had his answer. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then quietly and softly, he said, Leave. I didn't argue. I packed my things as fast as I could, hands shaking the whole time. She didn't come to stop me. I didn't see her at all. When I walked out of that house, I knew I wasn't leaving just for the night. I was leaving for good. I didn't look back as I drove away. There was nothing left to say, nothing that could change what had already happened. The weight of it all pressed down on me as I left. My mind replayed every moment, every choice that had led to this. For the first few weeks, I tried to push it all away. I told myself it was over, that I could move on. But guilt has a way of creeping in when you least expect it. It settled into the quiet moments, the silence of a new place where no one knew what I'd done. I thought about my cousin, about the betrayal I could never undo. I thought about her husband, about the way he looked at me when he told me to leave. And I thought about her. She didn't call. I hadn't expected her to. I wasn't even sure I wanted her to. But part of me still wondered what she wanted. What happened after I left? Did she confess? Did she try to save her marriage? Or did it all just fall apart? One evening, weeks later, my phone lit up with a message. You okay? I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. I don't know. A few minutes passed before she responded. Me neither. That was our last conversation. I heard through family that the marriage didn't survive. My cousin never spoke about it directly, but I could see the change. Conversations were shorter, interactions colder. He didn't know the full truth, but he knew enough. Time passed and life went on. I found myself in a new city, a new routine, trying to rebuild without looking back. But some things stay etched in memory. Some mistakes don't fade away. I don't regret what happened. That's the hardest part to admit. Because despite all the damage caused, despite all the pain, there was something real. Something neither of us could ignore. But wanting something doesn't make it right. One evening, I found myself rereading old messages, staring at her name. I thought about reaching out just once, just to see if she was okay. I didn't. Instead, I set my phone down, closed my eyes, and let the past stay where it belonged.